For the longest time, traditional education operated on this wildly inaccurate empty vessel myth. It was basically the assumption that you can just pour information into a student's head and they'll naturally retain it, completely regardless of who they are, what they actually care about, or where they are in life. But let's be real, if you've ever tried to teach, train, or even manage anyone, you already know that's entirely false. Today, we're challenging that myth head on in this explainer. We're going to dive into the architecture of adolescent and adult learning dynamics, digging right into the source material to see exactly how distinct, highly specific learner characteristics have to shape effective pedagogy. Picture this for a second. Think back to a time you delivered a presentation or a lesson. Why does the exact same material completely captivate one room where everyone's leaning in, they're asking questions, furiously taking notes? But then it puts another room straight to sleep with glazed over eyes and hidden yawns. It is a deeply frustrating reality for educators and corporate trainers everywhere. Well, the answer is that learning isn't just about what is being taught. The success of any lesson is intimately, heavily tied to exactly who is receiving it and how their brain is currently wired to process that specific information. So here is our roadmap for unpacking all of this. First, we're going to lay the foundation with the learner's blueprint. Then we'll symmetrically compare our two primary groups, looking inside the adolescent mind, followed by the adult learner's edge. And finally, we'll explore that vital wild card, the individual difference factor. All right, let's jump right into section 1, the learner's blueprint, and establish exactly why we need to rigorously analyze our audience before we even begin to teach a single concept. Learner characteristics are basically the traits and attributes shaping how knowledge is received, processed, and applied. And understanding these characteristics isn't just some nice little bonus for a teacher, it's absolutely central to all effective pedagogy. If you don't understand the blueprint of your learner, you're building your lesson on incredibly shaky ground. Think of it like trying to construct a massive skyscraper on a foundation meant for a tiny single-story home. The whole structure is going to collapse under the weight. The exact same thing happens in a classroom or a training session when the complexity of your delivery doesn't match the cognitive and emotional foundation of the people in the room. You just have to know what you're building on. Moving right along to section 2, inside the adolescent mind. We're looking at a highly curious, intensely energetic group that we can really think of as the explorers. We can fully understand these teenage explorers by breaking their development down into 4 distinct psychological and social dimensions: academic, social, emotional, and cognitive. Now, it's absolutely crucial to remember that these aren't just isolated silos neatly separated in a teenager's brain. Not at all. They are tangled, live wires that educators have to navigate simultaneously, every single day. Every adolescent sitting in front of you is processing information through all 4 of these channels at the exact same time. So academically, adolescents show immense curiosity and a powerful desire to explore, but they often need highly structured guidance to maintain their focus, and they rely heavily on peer competition and external motivation to just stay on track. Socially, though, peer influence is an absolute juggernaut. They're desperately seeking identity, recognition, and belonging within their circles. Because of this, you often get a fascinating and sometimes frustrating clash. You'll have a student who genuinely wants to succeed academically, but that desire violently collides with a social motivation, like the intense, paralyzing fear of answering a question wrong in front of the popular group. If you only focus on their academic capability and completely ignore that intense social anxiety, your lesson is going to fall flat. Then you throw in the emotional and cognitive dimensions, and we see an equally volatile dynamic. Emotionally, adolescents famously experience instability, heightened sensitivity, and rapid mood swings as they search for who they are. Yet, cognitively, they are right in the middle of a massive upgrade. They're systematically shifting away from concrete black and white thinking toward abstract reasoning and really complex analytical skills. This creates just an incredible internal paradox. You might have a teenager whose upgraded cognitive hardware allows them to suddenly grasp complex moral ambiguities in classic literature during first period, but whose emotional sensitivity causes them to literally break down in tears over a perceived slight in the hallway 5 minutes later. They're desperately searching for basic emotional validation while simultaneously running high-level cognitive software. Let's transition to section 3, the adult learner's edge, to see how this blueprint evolves into the adult phase of learning, a group we can characterize primarily as the pragmatists. We're looking at those exact same 4 developmental dimensions: academic, social, emotional, and cognitive. But we can clearly see how maturity and prior knowledge completely rewire the educational experience. Adults aren't just older, larger adolescents. Their entire processing framework has evolved. If you walk into a corporate training seminar and treat adult learners like high schoolers, it's a total recipe for failure. Their motivations, their boundaries, and their expectations are fundamentally different.
Academically, adults bring a wealth of life experience into the mix. They are fiercely goal-oriented, constantly linking what they're studying directly to career advancement, financial stability, or personal growth. And because they're balancing intense social obligations, juggling homework after putting the kids to bed or studying right after finishing a long, exhausting shift at work, they are incredibly protective of their time. They demand a clear, immediate return on investment for their attention. An adult learner wants to know right off the bat, how is this information going to help me get a promotion? How will it save me time? How does this solve a very specific problem I'm facing at the office tomorrow morning? If you can't answer those questions, they'll tune you out instantly.
Emotionally and cognitively, adults bring a really powerful synergy to the table. Emotionally, they possess a resilient, self-motivated stability. Sure, they might carry specific anxieties about performance or adapting to new tech, but generally, they're grounded. Cognitively, they rely on advanced critical thinking and reflective judgment. They seamlessly integrate abstract theories with practical, real-world application. Actually, scratch that. They won't just passively accept a theoretical concept from you. They'll challenge you. They'll raise a hand and say, okay, that theory sounds great on paper, but how does that actually work in my specific industry with the budget constraints we currently have? They demand a practical application over pure academic theory, every single time. When you look at these two profiles side by side, the contrast is just stark. On one side, we've got the identity-seeking adolescent thriving on heavily structured guidance, relying on peer interaction, navigating an emotional roller coaster while upgrading their cognitive abilities. And on the flip side, we have the purposeful, goal-oriented adult relying on maturity, demanding a practical return on their time investment, and bringing years of lived experience to validate or challenge what they're being taught. Seeing these distinct psychological architectures really drives home exactly why a one-size-fits-all teaching approach simply does not and literally cannot work. This brings us to Section 4, the individual difference factor. Because as foundational as these developmental stages are, age isn't the only thing dictating how a room operates. We have to constantly remind ourselves of this fundamental truth. No two learners are exactly alike. You could have a room filled strictly with adolescent explorers from the exact same neighborhood, or a boardroom packed entirely with adult pragmatists from the exact same corporate department. On paper, they might look like a perfectly homogeneous group, but in reality, their individual cognitive blueprints, their personal motivations, and the specific ways they process the words you're saying will vary wildly. It's a complex web of individual differences, manifesting through aptitude, interests, cultural background, personality, and learning styles. Just think about cultural background for a second, how someone's upbringing shapes their relationship with authority, how they view collaborative work versus individual achievement, or even how they interpret direct feedback. A critique that seems super helpful and straightforward to one student might feel deeply disrespectful or crushing to another, based entirely on their cultural framing. Recognizing these deeply ingrained individual variations mandates that we design inclusive pedagogy that actively respects and plans for diversity if we want to maximize every single student's potential. The source material we're looking at synthesizes this perfectly. It says that individual differences demand adaptive teaching strategies that foster inclusivity, equity, and transformation. Great teaching just isn't static. It's not some script you blindly read from while crossing your fingers and hoping for the best. It's highly adaptive, it's fiercely observant, and it's instantly responsive to the unique, complicated human beings sitting right there in front of you. I'm going to leave you with one final, pretty provocative thought to help evaluate your own instructional methods. If you truly want to captivate a room, the architecture of your lesson has to match the architecture of their minds. So you really have to ask yourself, are your teaching methods transforming to fit the learner, or are you stubbornly waiting for the learner to fit you? Thanks for joining this explainer. We'll see you next time.